I died at midnight on a cold hospital gurney alone with my father's last text message still glowing on my cracked phone screen. Sorry, got caught up with Emma's recital? Can you take an Uber? That was 3 days after I'd called him from the emergency room, bleeding internally from a ruptured appendix. 3 days of him promising to come, making excuses, choosing my half-sister Emma over me for the 1,000th time. The infection had spread to my bloodstream by then. The doctors said if someone had brought me in just 12 hours earlier, I would have lived. But no one came. I was 23 years old, and I died knowing that my father had spent my last conscious hours watching Emma's piano performance. He posted about it on Facebook. I saw it from my hospital bed, my vision already starting to blur. So proud of my little star, with 15 photos of Emma in her sparkly dress, beaming at the camera, Dad's arm around her shoulders. Not a single person knew I was dying 2 miles away. The last thing I remembered before the darkness took me was the nurse's pitying expression as she held my hand, a stranger giving me more comfort in my final moments than my own family had given me in years. Then I woke up. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, in my old twin bed with the purple comforter I'd picked out when I was 12. My Hannah Montana poster was still on the wall. My flip phone, my actual flip phone from 2008, was charging on my nightstand. I grabbed it with shaking hands. The date read September 15th, 2008. I was 14 again. I sat there for what felt like hours, my adult mind struggling to process what had happened. Reincarnation? Time travel? A dying hallucination? But the memories were too vivid, too real. I could remember everything from my first life with perfect clarity, every disappointment, every broken promise, every moment my father chose his real family over me. Because that's what I'd always been to Dad. The mistake from his first marriage, the obligation, the reminder of the wife who left him. My mother had walked out when I was 3, simply vanished one day and never came back. Dad had remarried within a year to Cheryl, a woman who already had a 6-year-old daughter, Emma. By the time I was old enough to understand, the hierarchy in our house was crystal clear. Emma was the beloved daughter, Cheryl was the cherished wife, and I was the inconvenient leftover. In my first life, I'd spent 23 years trying to earn Dad's love. I'd been the perfect daughter, straight A's, never asked for anything, cleaned the house, babysat Emma for free, stayed quiet and grateful for whatever scraps of attention he threw my way. I'd convinced myself that if I just tried hard enough, if I just proved I was worthy, he would finally see me. He never did. Even when I'd gotten into Princeton with a full scholarship, the proudest moment of my life, Dad had missed my graduation because it conflicted with Emma's 8th grade awards ceremony. When I'd landed my first big job at a tech startup, he'd cut our celebratory dinner short because Emma needed help moving into her freshman dorm. When I'd gotten engaged to Marcus, a man I'd thought loved me, Dad had forgotten to come to our engagement party. Marcus had left me 2 months later. "You're too needy," he'd said. "Too desperate for approval. It's exhausting." He was right. I had been desperate. Desperate for anyone to choose me, to put me first, to prove I was worth loving. But not anymore. Sitting in my 14-year-old body, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. I had been given an impossible gift. A second chance. And this time, I knew exactly how the story would go if I let it. I knew every disappointment that was coming, every broken promise, every casual cruelty. This time, I could rewrite the ending. The immediate question was, why was I here? Why this specific moment? I checked my flip phone's calendar and felt my stomach drop. Tonight was the homecoming dance, the first major breaking point of my relationship with my father. In my first life, Dad had promised to pick me up from homecoming at 10 p.m. It was a big deal for me. My first school dance, my first real dress, my first time feeling like a normal teenager instead of an afterthought. I'd been so excited, so hopeful. I'd even convinced myself that this would be a bonding moment for us. He never showed up. I'd waited outside the school until midnight in my cheap dress and borrowed heels, calling his phone over and over while it went to voicemail. I'd watched all my classmates leave with their families, seen their parents hug them and take photos and ask about their night. I'd stood there alone in the cold, trying not to cry, until finally a teacher had driven me home. When I'd gotten home, Dad had been asleep on the couch. Emma had wanted to see a late movie, and he'd forgotten about me entirely. When I'd woken him up, crying and humiliated, he'd been irritated that I'd disturbed him. "Jesus, Lily, it's not that big a deal," he'd said. "You could have called an Uber." I was 14. I didn't have money for an Uber. I didn't even have a smartphone yet. That night had broken something in me. It was the first time I'd truly understood that I would never be a priority to him, that no amount of hoping or trying would change that fundamental fact. But I'd been young and stupid and desperate, so I'd kept trying anyway. I'd spent another 9 years trying, right up until the moment I died alone with his dismissive text message as my last earthly memory. Not this time. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above my dresser. I looked so young, so soft, with my round cheeks and braces and hopeful eyes. I barely recognized myself. The woman I'd become in my first life had been worn down, dimmed, desperate for crumbs of affection. This girl still had light in her eyes. I was going to make sure it stayed there. My plan, started forming immediately. I had knowledge, 10 years of it. I knew which stocks would explode, which companies would fail, which trends would dominate. I knew the housing market would crash in 2008, that Bitcoin would emerge in 2009, that a young company called Uber would change transportation forever. I knew that Apple stock, trading at around $12 per share right now, would split multiple times and soar to over $300 within 15 years. But more importantly, I knew my father. I knew his patterns, his excuses, his endless capacity to choose Emma over me. And I knew that nothing I did would ever change him. So I wouldn't try. The first thing I did was go downstairs. It was Saturday morning and Dad was making pancakes for Emma while Cheryl read the newspaper. The kitchen smelled like maple syrup and burned butter. Dad was never a great cook, but Emma loved his pancakes. "Morning, Lily," Dad said absently, not looking up from the griddle. "There's cereal in the pantry." In my first life, I'd felt a sharp sting at that casual dismissal. This time, I just felt cold satisfaction. Let him show me exactly who he was. "Morning," I said neutrally. "Don't forget homecoming is tonight. You're picking me up at 10, right?" Oh yeah, sure." He still wasn't looking at me. He was focused on flipping a pancake into a perfect Mickey Mouse shape for Emma. "You promise?" I pressed. "It's really important to me." "I said yes, didn't I?" Now there was irritation in his voice. "Cheryl, did you see my phone?" I watched him for a moment longer, memorizing his indifference. Then I turned and went back upstairs. I spent the morning doing something I'd never done in my first life, planning for myself. I dug through my closet until I found the shoebox where I kept my savings, $247 in cash from birthdays and odd jobs. In my first life, I'd eventually spent this money on a birthday gift for Emma. This time, I had better plans. I also found my old diary, the one where I'd poured out my heart about every disappointment. I flipped through it, reading my younger self's desperate, hopeful scrawls. Maybe Dad will come to my science fair this time. Dad promised we'd go to the movies this weekend, just us. I think Dad is finally starting to see me. Page after page of hope and disappointment. I tore out every page and burned them in the bathroom sink, watching my old delusions turn to ash. When Cheryl knocked on the door asking about the smell, I told her I was burning old homework. She didn't care enough to question it. That afternoon, I went to homecoming with my friend Jessica. In my first life, I'd been so excited, so eager to have a perfect night to tell Dad about. This time, I barely paid attention to the decorations or the music or the drama. I danced with Jessica, took some photos, and spent most of the evening watching the clock. At 9:45 p.m., 15 minutes before Dad was supposed to pick me up, his text came through on my flip phone. "Emma wants to catch the late showing of High School Musical 3. Might be a little late picking you up. You okay to wait?" I stared at the message, feeling nothing but vindication. He was exactly who I knew he'd be. I didn't respond. At 10 p.m., another text. "Running late, be there by 10:30. I deleted it without responding. At 10:30, "Movie ran long, will be there by 11. Deleted. At 11:15, "Where are you? I'm outside." That one made me smile. He wasn't outside. I could see the parking lot from the gym windows. He was lying, probably hoping I'd just found another ride home so he wouldn't have to interrupt his evening with Emma. This time, I didn't wait outside in the cold. This time, I went to Mrs. Chen, my English teacher, and asked her for a ride home. "Of course, Lily," she'd said kindly. "Did your father get held up?" "Something like that," I'd replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. She'd driven me home, and I'd thanked her profusely. When I walked into the house at 11:45 p.m., Dad was indeed asleep on the couch, still in his jacket. Emma was upstairs in her room, probably posting about her perfect night on MySpace. I walked past Dad without waking him and went straight to my room. My phone buzzed with another text. "Lily, are you home? Why didn't you wait for me?" I turned off my phone and went to sleep. The next morning, Dad found me in the kitchen. I was eating cereal. I'd made it myself, as always, and reading a library book. "Lily, what the hell happened last night?" He looked tired and annoyed. "I drove all the way to the school and you weren't there." "I got a ride with Mrs. Chen," I said calmly, not looking up from my book. "Why didn't you answer my texts?" "My phone died." The lie came easily. "I tried calling you at 10 when you didn't show up, but it went to voicemail." "I texted you that I was running late." "My phone was dead," I repeated. "I couldn't see your texts." He sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Look, Emma really wanted to see that movie, and it was the last showing, but it's fine, Dad." He blinked. "What?" "It's fine. I got home safely. Don't worry about it." I could see the confusion on his face. He'd been gearing up for me to cry or yell or guilt trip him, the way I had countless times in my first life. My easy acceptance had thrown him off. "Oh, well, good." He hovered for a moment like he wanted to say something else, then shrugged and walked away. That was the moment I knew I could do this. I could rewrite everything. Over the next few weeks, I put my plan into motion. The first step was financial independence. I couldn't do anything if I was still dependent on Dad's meager allowance and charity. I started small. I took my $247 to the bank and opened my own savings account, forging Dad's signature on the parental consent form. The teller barely glanced at it. It was 2008, and security was lax. Then I went to the public library and used their computers to tell you, research investing. I had one major advantage. I knew the immediate future. The housing market was already starting to collapse. Lehman Brothers would file for bankruptcy in less than a month. The entire financial system was about to implode. But I also knew what would survive and thrive. I knew that certain companies would weather the storm and emerge stronger. I knew that some investors would make fortunes betting against the housing market. The problem was, I was 14. I couldn't open a brokerage account. I couldn't short mortgage-backed securities. I was limited in what I could do directly, but I could be creative. I spent hours at the library reading everything I could about finance, investing, and the looming crash. I printed out articles, took notes, built a timeline. Then I did something that would have been unthinkable in my first life. I reached out to my mother's family. My maternal grandmother, Helen, lived 3 states away. In my first life, Dad had cut off contact with her when I was 5, claiming she was a bad influence. I'd never questioned it, too desperate for Dad's approval to risk angering him by asking about Mom's side of the family. Now, with adult eyes, I understood the truth. Helen had probably tried to fight for custody or visitation, and Dad had shut her out completely. He'd wanted total control over the narrative of my mother's abandonment. I found Helen's number in an old address book buried in the back of Dad's desk drawer. My hands shook as I dialed from the school payphone, using quarters I'd saved from lunch money. The phone rang 3 times, then. "Hello?" Her voice was older than I remembered, but warm, so warm. "Grandma Helen?" My voice cracked. "It's Lily Morrison." There was a long, shocked silence. Then, "Lily? Oh my God, Lily, is that really you?" "Yes." I was crying now, couldn't help it. In my first life, I died without ever knowing I had family who might have loved me. "It's me." "Are you okay? Are you safe? Where are you calling from?" "I'm at school. I'm okay. I took a shaky breath. "I needed to talk to someone." to family. Oh, sweetheart. I could hear her crying too. I've been trying to reach you for years. Your father won't return my calls. He sends back my letters unopened. I've thought about you every single day. We talked for 40 minutes until I ran out of quarters. I told her about my life, carefully editing out the parts about rebirth and future knowledge, and she told me about herself. She was a retired accountant, widowed, living alone in a big house in Massachusetts. She'd tried to get visitation rights when I was young, but Dad's lawyers had been better. She'd been sending money for me every year on my birthday, but Dad had apparently kept it all. I have so much saved for you, Lily, she said. It's been sitting in an account waiting for you. Almost $15,000 now. My heart stopped. $15,000. Money that was mine that Dad had stolen. Grandma, I said carefully, I need your help with something. That phone call changed everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Helen and I spoke every day from the school payphone. She was brilliant, sharp, and clever, and so angry on my behalf when I told her about Dad's neglect. She didn't ask too many questions when I explained that I'd been studying finance and had some strong intuitions about upcoming economic trends. She just listened. You always were a smart girl, she said proudly. Your mother was brilliant too, you know. Graduated top of her class. You have her mind. With Helen's help, we set up a plan. She would be my proxy investor. I would tell her what to buy and when to sell, and she would execute the trades. Anything we made would be split 50-50, and my half would go into a trust fund that Dad couldn't touch. But Lily, she said seriously, I need you to be sure. If you're wrong about these investments, we could lose a lot of money. I'm sure, I told her, and I was. I'd lived through this once already. My first major prediction was Lehman Brothers. I told Helen to buy put options on their stock, essentially betting that it would crash. She was skeptical but trusted me enough to invest $5,000. On September 15th, 2008, exactly 1 month after I'd woken up in my 14-year-old body, Lehman Brothers filed for the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. The put options Helen had purchased soared in value. We made $47,000 in a single day. Helen called me that evening, her voice shaking. Lily, how did you know? I read a lot, I said simply, see, and I pay attention. We did it again with AIG, then with Bear Stearns. I guided her to short the housing market through specific ETFs that I knew would pay out. By December 2008, we had turned that initial $5,000 into over $200,000. But I wasn't done. In January 2009, I told Helen to start buying. Apple at $12 per share, Amazon at $51, Netflix at $4. Small positions in companies that would become giants. Tesla, Twitter, Airbnb. You want me to invest in an electric car company that barely exists? Helen had asked, incredulous. Trust me, I'd said. In 10 years, you'll be glad you did. She trusted me, and my trust fund started growing exponentially. But while I was building my financial future, I was also watching my family implode exactly as I'd known it would. Dad noticed the change in me almost immediately, though he didn't understand what it meant. I stopped trying to get his attention. I stopped asking if he wanted to do things with me. I stopped seeking his approval. When he forgot my 15th birthday, spending it at Emma's volleyball tournament instead, I didn't cry. I just took the $50 Helen had sent me and bought myself a birthday cake, eating it alone in my room while video chatting with her on the library computer. When he missed my parent-teacher conference, the one where I was being honored for having the highest GPA in my class, I didn't beg him to reschedule. I just asked Helen to attend via phone call, and she'd spent 20 minutes gushing to my teachers about how proud she was of me. When he skipped my winter concert because Emma had a really important soccer practice, I didn't even tell him about it in advance. Why bother? At first, Dad seemed relieved by my new independence. No more guilt trips, no more tears, no more demands on his time. He could focus entirely on Emma without that nagging reminder of his first daughter. But as months passed, I saw the confusion growing in his eyes. He'd always been able to count on me to be there, waiting for his attention like a loyal dog. Now I was somewhere else, focused on things he knew nothing about. What's going on with you? He asked me one evening in March. I was in the kitchen studying for AP exams. I'd managed to test into advanced classes mid-year, something I'd never done in my first life because I'd been too afraid of outshining Emma. What do you mean? I didn't look up from my textbook. You're different. Distant. I'm just busy, Dad. School is important. You never want to do things with the family anymore. I finally looked up at him. When have we ever done things as a family that included me? He blinked, taken aback. That's not fair. Okay. I went back to my book. Lily, don't be like this. Like what? Like cold. You're acting cold. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, bitter and sharp. Cold. I was cold. Not neglectful, not cruel, not dismissive. I was the problem for finally matching his energy. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said neutrally. I'm just focusing on my future. He'd left the kitchen frustrated, and I'd heard him complaining to Cheryl later. I don't know what's wrong with her. She's being so weird. Cheryl's response was predictable. She's probably just looking for attention. You know how she is. I'd smiled to myself and kept studying. By the summer of 2009, my trust fund had grown to over $400,000. Helen visited for the first time in 10 years, and Dad couldn't legally stop her. I'd threatened to call CPS if he tried, and he'd backed down immediately, not wanting the scrutiny. Seeing Helen in person was surreal. She looked like an older version of the mother I barely remembered. Same green eyes, same sharp cheekbones. She'd hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, crying into my hair. My girl, she'd whispered. My brilliant girl. I've missed you so much. We'd spent the week together, and she'd taken me shopping, to museums, to restaurants. She treated me like I was precious, worth her time and attention. It was addictive. Dad had been uncomfortable the entire week. He'd tried to play the devoted father when Helen was around, suddenly interested in my school and my hobbies and my plans. I'd watched his performance with detached amusement, answering his questions politely but without enthusiasm. On Helen's last day, she'd pulled Dad aside for a private conversation. I didn't hear what was said, but Dad had emerged looking pale and shaken. Helen had looked satisfied. What did you tell him? I'd asked her later. The truth, she'd said simply, that I know exactly what kind of father he's been, and that I'm watching now. After Helen left, Dad had tried harder for about 2 weeks. He'd asked about my day, offered to drive me places, even suggested we have a father-daughter dinner. But when Emma had inevitably needed something, he'd canceled without a second thought. The pattern was too ingrained to break. I didn't care. I had Helen now. I had my growing fortune. I had plans. The years blurred together in a strange way, so different from my first life, but also oddly similar. I watched Emma get everything she wanted, the expensive prom dress, the new car for her 16th birthday, the family trip to Disney World that I wasn't invited to because it's really more Emma's thing, you understand. I understood perfectly. I spent my time studying, investing, and building relationships with people who actually valued me. I became close with several teachers who saw my potential. I started a tutoring business, saving every penny. I took all the AP classes I could, preparing for college applications. And I watched my investments grow. Apple split its stock and soared. Amazon dominated e-commerce. Netflix destroyed Blockbuster. Tesla went public and our early shares multiplied in value. By my 18th birthday in 2012, my trust fund was worth over $2.3 million. Helen and I talked every week. She'd become more than a grandmother. She was my advisor, my confidant, my family. She was the one who helped me practice for interviews, who read my college essays, who stayed up late talking about my dreams. She was everything Dad should have been, but never was. When college acceptance letters started arriving in spring of 2012, I got into everywhere I applied. Princeton, Yale, Stanford, MIT. Each acceptance felt like vindication, proof that I was worth something even if Dad never saw it. Dad had barely looked at my acceptance letters. That's great, honey, he'd said absently. Emma was having a crisis because she'd only gotten into her second-choice school and all his attention was focused on consoling her. I chose Stanford. It was as far from home as I could get while staying in the continental US. We'll need to figure out financial aid, Dad had said when I told him. Stanford is expensive. Actually, I have a full scholarship, I lied smoothly. In truth, Helen and I were paying for everything from my trust fund. You don't need to worry about it. He'd looked relieved. Oh, good. That's good. He hadn't even asked how I'd gotten a full scholarship. Hadn't wondered why Stanford would offer that to someone he barely knew. He was just happy he didn't have to pay. The summer before college was the last time I lived in that house. I'd already begun planning my permanent departure. In August 2012, Helen helped me move into my Stanford dorm. Dad had promised to come, but Emma had a really important meeting with her academic advisor at her school, so he'd canceled at the last minute. I'm so sorry, Lily, he'd texted. I'll visit soon, I promise. I'd deleted the message without responding. His promises meant nothing. Helen and I had spent 3 days setting up my room, exploring campus, and finalizing our investment strategy. We'd made another killing in the market by then. Facebook had gone public in May, and we'd bought in at the IPO and sold at the peak. Our portfolio was now worth over $3.5 million. You're set for life, sweetheart, Helen had said, looking at our account balances. You never have to depend on anyone ever again. That's the plan, I'd agreed. College was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was around people who valued intelligence and ambition. I thrived in my courses, double majoring in computer science and business, the same combination I'd studied in my first life, but without the constant distraction of trying to prove myself to Dad. I made friends, real friends who chose to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because they felt obligated. I dated casually and without the desperate neediness that had ruined my relationship with Marcus in my first life. I joined clubs, won awards, landed prestigious internships. And I never called Dad. He'd text occasionally, "How's school? Everything okay? Haven't heard from you in a while." I'd respond with bland, uninformative updates. "School is good. Everything's fine. Been busy with classes." He never pushed for more. Never asked what I was actually doing, what I was actually feeling. The minimal effort I gave him was apparently enough to satisfy whatever parental obligation he felt. Emma, meanwhile, was struggling. She'd been the golden child for so long, everyone's favorite, the one who got everything she wanted. But college was different. She wasn't special there. She was average, just another pretty girl who'd been overpraised by her parents. She started calling Dad constantly, crying about her classes, her roommate, her social life. And Dad, true to form, dropped everything to comfort her. He'd fly out to visit her every few months, spending thousands of dollars on plane tickets and hotels. He visited me exactly once in 4 years, and that was only because he was already in California for a conference. We'd met for lunch at a restaurant near campus. He'd spent the entire hour talking about Emma, her new boyfriend, her potential graduate schools, her plans for the future. He'd asked me exactly 3 questions about my own life, and he hadn't really listened to any of the answers. When the check came, he'd looked at me expectantly. I'd paid without comment, using the black credit card connected to my trust fund. He'd noticed the card. It was heavy metal, the kind reserved for high net worth individuals, but he'd just assumed I'd stolen it or something. He certainly didn't think his overlooked daughter could have that kind of money. After he left, I'd sat in my car and felt nothing. No hurt, no anger, no disappointment, just a cold, clear understanding that this man had never been a father to me. He'd been a biological necessity and a lifetime of lessons in what not to accept from people. I graduated Stanford in 2016 with highest honors, multiple job offers from top tech companies, and a trust fund worth over $7 million. Helen was in the audience at my graduation, crying and cheering. She'd brought a huge sign with my name on it. Dad had sent a card with a $50 gift certificate to Olive Garden inside. He hadn't come to the ceremony. It conflicted with Emma's graduation from her graduate program. I took a job at a major tech company in San Francisco, making a comfortable 6-figure salary that was honestly pocket change compared to my investment portfolio. But I liked the work, liked the structure, liked proving that I could succeed in the normal world too. I bought a beautiful apartment in Pacific Heights, paid in cash, $1.8 million for a 2-bedroom with views of the Golden Gate Bridge. I furnished it carefully, each piece chosen because I loved it, not because it was cheap or practical. I filled it with art and books and comfortable furniture. It was my space. Mine. No one could take it from me. Helen visited often. We'd spend weekends cooking together, going to galleries, talking about everything and nothing. She was in her 70s now, still sharp as a tack, still managing her own portfolio alongside mine. "You did it," she'd said one evening, sitting on my balcony with glasses of wine, watching the sun set over the bay. "You built a life completely independent of him." "We did it," I'd corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have," she'd said firmly. "You would have found another way. You're your mother's daughter, brilliant and strong and unstoppable." I'd learned more about my mother over the years. Helen had given me photos, stories, memories. My mother hadn't abandoned me by choice. She'd been deeply mentally ill, suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and depression that Dad had refused to acknowledge or treat. She'd disappeared during a psychotic episode and had died 3 months later, hit by a car while wandering in a fugue state. Dad had never told me any of this. He'd let me grow up thinking my mother simply hadn't wanted me, that I was so unlovable even my own mother had chosen to leave. Learning the truth had hurt, but it had also healed something. My mother had been sick, not cruel. She hadn't chosen to leave me, and she'd given me a grandmother who loved me fiercely. I still barely spoke to Dad. He'd text every few months. "How are you?" "Haven't heard from you in forever." "Emma says you never respond to her messages either." Emma had indeed been trying to contact me. She'd graduated from her master's program and was struggling to find a job. I'd seen her LinkedIn posts, her increasingly desperate messages on Facebook. She'd started reaching out to me about a year after I'd graduated, asking if my company was hiring, if I could refer her, if I knew anyone who could help. I'd ignored every message. She'd tried to play the family card. "I know we haven't been close, but we're sisters. Can't you help me out?" I'd blocked her. Dad had called me about it, actually picking up the phone for once. "Lily, Emma really needs help finding a job. She says you're working at a big tech company. Can't you put in a word for her?" "No," I'd said simply. "What? Why not?" "Because I don't want to." "That's really selfish of you. She's your sister." I'd laughed at that. Actually laughed. "Is she? Because I don't remember her acting like a sister. I remember her having a father who gave her everything while I got nothing. I remember you missing every important moment of my life because Emma needed something. I remember dying alone in a hospital room while you watched her piano recital." There was confused silence on the other end. "What? What are you talking about? You didn't die in a hospital room." I'd realized my mistake. I was mixing up my lives, but I'd recovered quickly. Figure of speech. The point is, Emma had everything. She had you. She doesn't get my help, too. "This is really unlike you, Lily. You've always been so giving." "No," I'd interrupted. "I've always been desperate for your approval. There's a difference, and I'm done being desperate." I'd hung up on him. He'd tried calling back several times. I'd let them all go to voicemail. Eventually, he'd stopped. The years continued to pass. I excelled at my job, got promoted repeatedly, and eventually left to start my own company, a cybersecurity firm that I'd built using my knowledge of future data breaches and security vulnerabilities. We'd landed major contracts within the first year. My net worth broke 8 figures when I was 28. Helen threw me a party to celebrate. It was small, intimate, just her, a few close friends, and my boyfriend of 2 years, David. He was a patent attorney, brilliant and kind, and completely obsessed with me. He'd met Helen dozens of times and loved her almost as much as I did. "To Lily," Helen had toasted that evening. "Who proved that you don't need toxic people in your life to succeed? Who showed us all that sometimes the best revenge is living well?" I'd smiled and raised my glass. Dad hadn't been invited. He didn't even know about the party. He barely knew about my company. Our relationship had dwindled to the occasional text message, usually when he wanted something. But Emma had been watching. I'd noticed her viewing my LinkedIn profile repeatedly. I'd seen her commenting on mutual acquaintances' posts when they'd mentioned working with me. She'd even tried to show up at my office once, but security had turned her away when she wasn't on the visitor list. Then came the message that changed everything. It was late 2020, and I was 32 years old. The COVID pandemic had been raging for months, and everyone was isolated and desperate. My company had actually thrived. Cybersecurity was more important than ever with everyone working remotely. The message came through LinkedIn. "Lily, please, I need to talk to you. It's about Dad." I'd stared at it for a long moment. Then I'd blocked that account too. But she'd tried again from a different account. "Dad is sick. Really sick. Cancer. He's asking for you." I'd felt nothing. No rush of concern, no guilt, no compulsion to rush to his side. Just that same cold clarity that had sustained me for 18 years. I'd typed back, "I hope he has someone there for him, the way I didn't have anyone when I was dying at 23. Then I'd blocked that account too. Emma had somehow gotten my phone number, probably from an old contact list. She'd called me 12 times in one evening. I'd let them all go to voicemail. The voicemails were increasingly frantic. "Lily, please pick up. He's really sick. He might die. He wants to apologize. Don't you care that he's your father?" On the 13th call, I'd answered, "Stop calling me." "Lily, thank God. Look, I know you're mad at Dad, but mad?" I'd laughed. "I'm not mad. Mad implies I care enough to feel anger. I feel nothing for him, Emma. Absolutely nothing. He's your father." "Biologically, yes. In every other way that matters, no. He's been more of a father to you than he ever was to me." "That's not true. He loves you." "Does he?" I'd asked calmly. "Did he love me when he forgot to pick me up from homecoming? Did he love me when he missed my graduation? Did he love me when I got into Princeton and he didn't even look at the acceptance letter? Did he love me when I was dying in a hospital bed alone while he watched your performance?" "What are you talking about? You never died in a hospital. That doesn't matter." I'd cut her off. "The point is, he had 32 years to be a father to me. He chose not to. I don't owe him anything now, especially not a deathbed reconciliation that's more about making him feel better about his choices than actually caring about me." "You're being cruel." "I'm being honest. There's a difference. He wants to see you. He wants to apologize. Then he should have apologized 18 years ago when it might have mattered. Please, Lily, he's dying. Don't you want closure?" I'd considered this. Did I want closure? What would that even look like? Some tearful conversation where he admitted he'd been a terrible father and I forgave him? A Hallmark moment where we hugged and I cried and pretended that 3 decades of neglect could be erased by a few words? No. "I have closure," I told Emma. "I got it the day I stopped waiting for him to choose me. Tell Dad. I hope he finds peace with his choices, but I won't be part of his redemption arc." I'd hung up. Emma had tried a few more times over the next weeks, but I'd blocked her number. Dad had tried to text me once, a rambling message about regrets and love and wanting to make things right. I'd deleted it without reading past the first few words. Helen had asked me if I was sure about my decision. "I'm not defending him," she'd said carefully. "God knows he doesn't deserve your forgiveness. But are you sure you won't regret not seeing him?" "I'm sure," I'd said. "He had every opportunity to be in my life. He chose not to take any of them. I'm not going to absolve him of his guilt just so he can die feeling better about himself. That's not my job." "Okay," she'd said simply. "Then I support you." Dad had died 3 months later. Emma had sent me an email with the funeral details. I'd deleted it. I didn't go to the funeral. I was at a spa in Napa with David instead, getting couples massages and drinking expensive wine. When David had asked if I was okay, if I needed to talk about my father's death, I'd smiled and said, "I already mourned him years ago. This changes nothing." And it was true. I'd mourned the father I'd wanted, the father I'd deserved, the father he'd never been. I'd done that morning at 14 when I'd woken up with the memories of a wasted life and made the decision to stop trying to earn his love. What I'd gained instead was so much better. A relationship with Helen, financial independence, a successful career, genuine friends, a loving partner, and most importantly, self-respect. I'd learned to love myself in a way I never had in my first life. I'd learned that I was worthy of love and attention and care, not because I earned it through perfect behavior, but simply because I existed. The weeks after Dad's death were surprisingly eventful. Emma had apparently been shocked that I didn't come to the funeral. She'd sent increasingly angry emails accusing me of being cold-hearted, selfish, ungrateful. "After everything Dad did for you," one email had said. "He raised you, fed you, kept a roof over your head." I'd responded to that one just once. "He did the legal minimum required of a parent. That doesn't earn him a medal. That's just called not being criminally negligent. If you think that's worth celebrating, your bar's much lower than mine." She hadn't responded after that. The real surprise came a month after the funeral when I'd received a call from Dad's estate lawyer. "Ms. Morrison, this is Harold Chen. I'm handling your father's estate. I need to discuss his will with you." I'd been genuinely curious. "I'm listening." "Your father left his entire estate to Emma, with one exception. He left you a letter." I'd laughed. "A letter? After everything, he'd left me a letter." "Would you like me to mail it to you?" "Sure," I'd said. "Why not?" The letter had arrived a week later. I'd stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. It was thick, multiple pages of handwritten text. I'd poured myself a glass of wine, settled onto my balcony with the Golden Gate Bridge glittering in the distance, and started reading. "Dear Lily," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't know if you'll even care. Maybe you won't even read this letter. Maybe you'll throw it away like you've thrown me away for the past 18 years. But I need to write this anyway, even if just for myself." I'd taken a long sip of wine and continued reading. The letter was full of regrets and excuses. He'd written about how he'd been overwhelmed after my mother's disappearance, how he'd struggled to bond with me when I looked so much like her, how he'd fallen into a pattern with Cheryl and Emma that he couldn't figure out how to break. He'd written about noticing too late how much he'd neglected me, about wanting to fix it but not knowing how. "I know I failed you," he'd written. "I know that now. I wish I could go back and do everything differently. I wish I'd been the father you deserved, but I can't change the past, and you've made it clear you don't want me in your future. I understand. I just hope that someday you can forgive me, not for my sake, but for yours. Holding on to anger will only hurt you." I'd laughed at that line. Holding on to anger? I wasn't holding on to anger. I was holding on to indifference. And there was a crucial difference. The letter had gone on for several more pages, a litany of regrets and apologies and justifications. At the very end, he'd written, "I love you, Lily. I always have, even if I was terrible at showing it. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I never told you that when it mattered. Please know that my biggest regret in life is losing you. You were always the best thing I ever did, and I was too stupid to see it until it was too late." I'd sat there on my balcony watching the sun set over the bay and felt still nothing. These weren't the words of a man who'd actually understood what he'd done wrong. These were the words of a man who was scared of dying with guilt. He was apologizing because it made him feel better, not because he'd actually grasped the depth of his failure. If he'd really been proud of me, he would have shown up to my graduation. If he'd really loved me, he would have picked me up from homecoming. If he'd really wanted to be my father, he would have done it while he was alive, and I was still hoping he would. I'd folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a drawer. Not because I treasured it, but because it was evidence. Evidence that I'd been right all along. Evidence that my decision to cut him out had been justified. David had found me on the balcony an hour later. "You okay?" he'd asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "I'm perfect," I'd said. And I meant it. Life continued its upward trajectory. My company kept growing. David proposed on a beach in Maui, with Helen there to witness it. We got married in a small ceremony in Napa. Just Helen, a few close friends, and a lot of joy. Emma had somehow found out and showed up at the venue. Security had escorted her out when she'd started causing a scene, yelling about how I was selfish and heartless and forgetting my family. You were never my family, I'd told her calmly as she was being led away. You were the evidence of everything I'd never be to my father. Don't worry, though. You got everything you wanted. You got all of him. I hope it was worth it. She'd been crying as security escorted her to her car. I'd gone back inside and danced with my husband, surrounded by people who actually loved me. Helen passed away peacefully in her sleep when I was 35. I'd been with her the day before, and we'd spent hours talking and laughing and looking through old photos. She'd held my hand and told me how proud she was, how much she loved me, how my mother would have been so amazed by the woman I'd become. You saved me, I'd told her, crying. When I had no one, you were there. You saved yourself, sweetheart, she'd said. I just gave you the tools. You did all the work. Her death hit me harder than Dad's ever could have. I mourned her deeply, genuinely, because she'd been real family, chosen, earned, mutual. She'd loved me not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She'd left me everything. Her house, her own investment portfolio, decades of love letters she'd written to me, but never sent when Dad was blocking contact. I'd read those letters and cried for days. But even in death, she'd taken care of me. Her will had included detailed instructions for how to handle her estate, which charities to donate to, even which of her possessions she wanted me to have versus which should be auctioned. Emma had tried to come to Helen's funeral. I'd had her removed. She wasn't even your real grandmother, Emma had shouted as security escorted her away. She was more real than anyone in your family ever was to me, I'd replied. Now at 38, I'm sitting in my home office in my Pacific Heights apartment, looking at my company's latest quarterly reports. We've just been valued at $200 million. My personal net worth is somewhere north of $50 million, though I've honestly stopped keeping precise track. I have a husband who adores me. I have friends who value me. I have a career that fulfills me. I have a life that I built entirely on my own terms, without anyone's help or approval. My phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. I almost delete it without looking, but something makes me open it. It's Emma. Lily, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know something. I found Dad's journals when I was cleaning out his house. He wrote about you a lot. He knew he failed you, he knew he lost you, and he regretted it every single day. He was just too proud and too scared to reach out. He thought you hated him. I just thought you should. Know that he did love you in his own broken way. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for taking so much and not seeing what it cost you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I read the message twice. Then I delete it. It doesn't matter if Dad loved me in his own broken way. Love without action is just words. Love without effort is just guilt. And I don't need his retrospective regret or Emma's too-late awareness. I have something better, a life I'm proud of, a life I built from the ashes of the first one, where I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well, completely, independently, joyfully well. I close my phone and look out at the Golden Gate Bridge, golden in the sunset. David is making dinner in the kitchen. I can hear him singing off-key and smell garlic and wine. Tomorrow I have a board meeting where we'll discuss our next acquisition. This weekend I'm flying to New York to speak at a tech conference. My life is full, my life is mine. And Dad's last message to me, whether it was that final text in my first life or that posthumous letter in this one, doesn't matter anymore. Because I stopped waiting for him to choose me 18 years ago, and in doing so, I chose myself. That was all I ever needed to do.